Okay, so now we know how to create tracks. Now we're going to look at one of the most important ways of manipulating the sound on a track, the channel strip. Every track has its own unique channel strip, and the channel strip of the currently selected track is always the far left strip in the inspector sidebar here. So let's take a look at what's going on here. Although it would make visual sense to look at each of these buttons from top to bottom, it actually makes more sense to look in a slightly different order, which more closely reflects the path that your audio signal is going to take through this channel strip. When working with sound in a digital audio environment, it always helps to think of the path that a particular sound takes before it comes out of your speakers. That's because very often the order in which we apply different effects to the audio will have a big impact on how it sounds. So first off, let's look at these two slots which tell us the input and output of this track. Click and hold to change the input. Under the Inputs drop-down, you'll find all of the inputs currently offered by your sound card or audio interface. So if you plugged your microphone, keyboard or guitar into input 2, select it here if you'd like to record that. As you can see at the moment, I only have 2 inputs to choose from because I'm working with a small 2-channel audio interface. If you're using a larger interface, of course you'll have more channels to select here. Once you've selected the input you want to use, you're ready to start recording. Below the Input submenu is a menu labelled Bus. We're going to look at buses in more detail later, but essentially they allow you to route audio between different tracks in your project. Using buses you can group several channels together or play the same sound on 2 different channels, applying different effects on each, amongst many other useful techniques. The Output slot allows you to select where the sound from your track goes to next. By default, this goes to the stereo output. In other words, it goes out of the master output and out of your speakers. For most channels, you won't need to change this. However, if you want to route the sound through a bus or a series of buses before it gets to the speakers, you can do that by selecting a bus here. So now we're going to skip to the very bottom of the visible channel strip to these small buttons. This one labelled with an O allows you to change a track from mono to stereo and back again. Notice that when I do that, the input slot automatically changes to require 2 inputs. Recording in stereo means recording 2 separate streams of audio, for example by setting up a stereo pair of microphones. The next button is labelled I. This stands for Input Monitoring. It allows you to hear the signal that is coming in from your input into the channel. I'm going to select input 2, which I've plugged my electric guitar into. If I play the guitar now, you won't be able to hear it, except possibly on my vocal mic. But if I enable Input Monitoring, now you can hear the guitar. It's not being recorded yet, but this allows me to check that the signal is coming in at an appropriate level. The next button is marked R. This arms a track, enabling it for recording. It doesn't start the recording, it only enables the track for recording. And of course you can arm multiple tracks at once. This would be more easily done by arming all the tracks in the track header, here in the Arrange section. If you're doing multi-track recording, such as recording a drum kit or an entire band with multiple microphones, this is how you would do it. Once the tracks that you want to record are armed, you can hit the record button on the transport or hit the letter R to begin recording your take. And as you can see, we now have some guitar recorded as audio on our track. The buttons marked M and S mute and solo a track respectively. A muted track will not output any audio to its destination, in this case the stereo output. If you hit solo, only the solo track will output audio. You can solo multiple tracks, and any track that isn't soloed will not be audible. This is useful if you want to work on the sound of a track in isolation without interference from any other sounds. This black vertical bar is called the meter. It monitors the volume of the track, although we more commonly refer to that as its level. The fader next to the meter allows you to turn a track's level up or down. This is the most basic function in the mixing process. It allows you to alter the level of individual tracks so that no particular track is too loud or too quiet. Above the fader is the pan control. This allows you to change where the sound sits in the stereo field. In practice, that means changing the level of the sound in each individual speaker. If a sound plays mostly from the left speaker, it will appear to sit in the left-hand side of the stereo field, and vice versa. So, for example, you might pan two different guitar tracks to opposite speakers so that they sound more separate. Or you might pan a backing vocal to one side so that it doesn't interfere with the lead vocal. By the way, many of Logic's controls can be quickly recentered by holding Alt and then clicking them. It's a useful little time saver. Next, let's take a look at the insert slots. An insert is a module that processes the sound in some way to make it sound different. Inserts are more commonly known these days as plugins, and plugins can process sound in many different ways. Some plugins boost or cut out certain frequencies from a sound. Some give a sound a reverb or an echo. Some plugins distort sound like an overdriven guitar amp, while others can mangle sound in such a way that it's barely recognizable. One of Logic's strengths is that it comes with a wide array of excellent professional plugins built right in. Clicking and holding a slot will bring up the menu of plugins. Let's add an amp simulator to this guitar to make it sound like it's been played through an amp. Now let's add a reverb to the sound. You can begin to see the power of having a flexible chain of plugins. Be aware that plugins operate in order from top to bottom, so if I swap the order of these two plugins, you would hear a change in the sound. A plugin can be moved by holding down the Command key while dragging it. If you drag a plugin onto another plugin, they will swap positions. If you hold Alt whilst clicking a plugin slot, you can enable or disable the plugin. This is useful for checking how the plugin is affecting the sound. Just above the insert slots is a small box marked EQ. This is essentially a thumbnail-sized preview for one of Logic's built-in plugins, the Channel EQ. If you double-click it, a Channel EQ will be placed in the next available slot, but you can also add a Channel EQ using the usual menu. You might be wondering, why does the Channel EQ get special treatment? Why does it have this little preview box? Well, EQ is probably the most common type of effect that gets used on tracks, because it can boost and cut different frequencies in the sound, and these boosts and cuts are usually used to make sure the sound sits well in a mix. It's useful to be able to see at a glance what EQ has been applied to any given track. That's why Logic comes with this handy EQ preview. The Logic plugins are fantastic, they're professional quality tools, and it's perfectly possible to make professional songs using only these tools if you know how to use them properly. However, there are also a large number of plugins made by third-party developers out there, which can provide alternatives to the Logic ones, or which can add functions that Logic doesn't have. These can be found in the bottom submenu marked Audio Units. As you can see, I've got quite a few, some of which are released for free by developers and some of which I've bought. The sends allow you to send the sound from your track to a bus. This is different from setting the output to a bus. Again, we're going to look at this in a dedicated video in the mixing section of these tutorials, so don't worry too much if you don't get this quite yet. The final slot we have to look at is this one marked Setting. This slot lets you save and load channel strip settings, as well as letting you copy and paste channel strips. Saving a setting will save everything you've set up on it. This includes the fader level, the plugins, and all the settings within the plugins. So if you come up with a favorite chain of effects, you can save it and reuse it in the same project or within a future project. Of course, Logic comes with lots of pre-made channel strip settings, which are a good way to explore some of what you can do with Logic. So I'd encourage you to explore these. Be aware that there are different channel strip presets for audio tracks and software instrument tracks. Software instrument tracks usually include a preset software instrument as well as a number of effects in their channel strip presets. That was a fairly quick whistle-stop tour of the channel strips, but we're going to look at most of these functions in more depth later on in these videos, so I just wanted to give you a quick overview for now.